to this telephone town hall with Senator Michael Bennet. We'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. We have quite a few people on this call, and we would like to get started. We'd like to just ask everybody to mute your mics. The moderator can unmute you. And there is a question and answer feature as part of this Zoom call that you can utilize to submit any kind of comments, questions that you have. Please utilize that feature, and we will go ahead and read those questions when they come up. At this point, I would like to turn this over to John Taylor, President and CEO of the Boulder Chamber, and he will do an introduction and welcome on behalf of the Northwest Chamber Alliance. Thank you.
Folks know, I think my mic's on now. Is my mic on? Everybody hear me? That we are here today as the Northwest Chamber Alliance. And that is an organization that was formed probably about 5 years ago.
Hello?
Hello, Andrea, we're all set there? Hello?
We seem to have lost John.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, then I'm going to keep going then. Let me just back it up. So I'm welcoming this John Taylor, President and CEO of the Boulder Chamber. And I'm welcoming you on behalf of the Northwest Chamber Alliance, which is a coalition of 7 chambers in the Northwest Metro Denver area. 7 chamber organizations, the Boulder Chamber, the Broomfield Chamber, the Lafayette Chamber, the Latino Chamber of Boulder County, the Longmont Area Chamber of Commerce, the Louisville Chamber, and the Superior Chamber. And we proudly represent approximately 3,600 businesses made up of 370,000 employees of nonprofits, institutions as varied as the University of Colorado and our federal laboratories, and companies like Google, right down to your favorite brewery. Each of our leaders of the chamber organizations are on the call today, and we're prepared to discuss issues that are facing our businesses with Senator Bennet. At the conclusion of Senator Bennett's comments, we will have each of them ask just questions as a follow-up to Senator Bennett's remarks. I'll just open this, this discussion by just noting, as everybody does, that these are very difficult times. However, we are in the Northwest area a very resourceful business community supported by our chamber organizations, but we know that it's going to take federal assistance and action to help us get through these challenging times. So that's why we're pleased to have Senator Bennet with us today. I also just want to announce and make sure that everybody's aware that we are going to have also a town hall with Senator Cory Gardner tomorrow at 4 o'clock. And if you follow the link on your invitation, that is, again, an exclusive presentation and conversation, as is today, with our top business leaders from the chambers of the Northwest Chamber Alliance. So without further ado, I want to introduce our great Senator, Michael Bennet. I know him personally as a great leader in our community nationally as well. But he's also one that listens. And I would say that consistent with somebody who listens before acting, his remarks, I am told, will be relatively short so that he can allow for the dialogue and questioning. So without further ado, and so everybody knows, he's on a telephone right now, so we will not actually see a visual of him, but I welcome and thank Senator Bennet for being with us today.
Thank you, John. That's very kind of you to
to say those things, and it's nice to hear your voice, and I'm very grateful you're able to assemble all these folks to have this conversation. As you said, I mean, this is a moment, I'll repeat this in a second, but it's very, very important for me and my office and Corey and his office to get feedback from all of you as we implement this. So I don't want to spend as much time talking. I'd like to spend the time taking people's questions and criticisms and observations. I can't thank you enough, all of you, for taking time out today for this call and tomorrow with Corey. I hope everybody's taking care of themselves during this incredibly difficult time. What I would do is give a brief update on the federal response to the pandemic and then spend the rest of the time in a conversation with all of you. This could be a few minutes. We want to hear from as many of you as possible. Right now, we're facing a challenge that's greater than any we've seen since World War II. And the history of this has obviously not yet been written. It's possible that we're going to end up being able to flatten this curve in a way that avoids the worst for Colorado and the country. I certainly hope that's true. But at the moment, we're facing a massive public health crisis that's precipitated a massive economic crisis. And as John said, that's what's called on us to create an unprecedented federal response. We've had three phases. The first two came in early March. One was $8.3 billion to expand testing and treatment. To show you how far we've come, the first request from the administration was about $1.8 billion. We funded it at $8 billion. Second phase was just the following week when we expanded paid sick leave and helped states administer unemployment and did some more for testing. The third phase, which I know all of you have read about, was the massive $2.2 trillion package we passed 3 weeks ago to shore up our healthcare system and our economy. I know you've heard a lot of details about the bill, but if you've got specific questions, I'm happy to take that in the Q&A. I'm not going to go through the details right now. At a broader level, though, just to give you a sense of scale, when you talk about $2.2 trillion, that's the largest emergency spending bill in American history, and it actually probably isn't enough given the challenges that we face. It was a really interesting process over about a 48-hour period in D.C. Mitch McConnell, put his bill on the floor, and he said it was sort of a take it or leave it, and attacked the Democrats for playing political games. The reality was Mitch's bill had $1 trillion in it. By the time we were done over the next 48 hours, the bill was $2.2 trillion. It included funding for state and local governments, $150 billion, none of which had been included before. It doubled the amount of money available to our hospitals to about $150 billion. I think we made good progress, and interestingly enough, in the end, we got 96 votes in the Senate, which is every single Republican and every single Democrat. We, as all of you know, especially the last few years, we haven't been able to name a post office in a short period of time or in a bipartisan way, and we did it with this bill. I think that's a reflection of how much urgency people felt, and my hope is that we can go forward and proceed with the same sense of urgency because our work's not over. So to start with, right in front of us, we've got, in front of all of us, we've got to implement the bills that we've already passed. Given how quickly they've come together, we know there are things that are going to need to be fixed. I spend a lot of my day on the phone with people having suggestions ranging from the front lines of our healthcare workers to our hospitals to our small businesses and to our bankers, insurance companies, and others. So I encourage you to bring your suggestions today. I know there are many small businesses across the state and the country that are facing real challenges with the Paycheck Protection Program, for example, which the administration has said it dramatically almost oversubscribed. Not at all a surprise to me. I always thought the number of $350 billion was going to be way too low, but the difference between having it subscribed and actually having it go out are two different things, and ensuring that the folks that are not just the ones with the closest connection to well-established banks, but that others as well, small businesses and rural communities and others have access, I think is something that's going to be very important. To know that that the businesses most affected by the pandemic are actually being served by the program. Not convinced we've gotten there yet. And we've got to stay on top of the federal agencies to make sure they're being responsive and getting the money out the door quickly, both to individuals and to businesses. At the same time, we've got to start thinking about our priorities for the next package. I'm completely open for business on that as well. If people have comments on that, right now the contents are totally up in the air. We actually don't know whether it's going to start in the House or the Senate. And I think that I would say this, rather than the bill being an entirely new bill, like say an infrastructure bill, I think it's likely that the Congress will use it to fix issues in the last bill and increase some of the buckets that were contained there. Last week I sent some initial thoughts to Senator Pelosi's office and to the leadership in the Senate based on the conversations I've been having in Colorado. And what I've suggested, this is not at all an exclusive list. More money for hospitals and equipment, increased support for state and local governments, a lot more relief for small business, and more funding for critical services like SNAP, so people don't become so desperate that they go out looking for work when they should be staying at home. We have no idea what the timing is going to be of the package. I'm happy to take you through the politics of this if anybody's interested, and what it's going to take, once again, to get to a bipartisan result in the end, because that's really what we're going to need. Once we get through that phase, I have strong interest, and I think others do, in the longer-term investments in things like infrastructure and broadband, which we desperately need. I'll save my broader comments for the Q&A or for the end of this conversation, but I really do think this is a moment when we need to look ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves why we haven't been making the investments in the United States that we might have been making over the last quarter century or so, and what we're going to do to change that course. That's something I'm anxious to talk about if people are interested, but let me hold off on that for right now. I want to emphasize that as this continues to go, we really want to hear from you, understand what we need to prioritize going forward. And you don't have to wait for these calls. Many of you know my regional director, James Thompson, is based in Fort Collins. His number is 970-222-6397. Amy Friedman is my state director. She's in the Denver office, which is 303-455-7600. And Charlie Anderson, who does economic policy on my team, can be reached in the DC number. We can give you that later. Charlie's on this call as well. So let me just, John, close by saying that I recognize we're in a moment that not a single person on this call would have wanted, but it's here and we have to face it. And I draw enormous inspiration from other generations of Americans and Coloradans, none of whom went through exactly what we're going through today, but they went through tough times themselves and faced those times down and made sure they provided a stronger and more resilient democracy in our economy for the generation coming after us. That's what our job is now. This is our chance to do it. I think that if we assert our best traditions as Coloradans and as Americans, I have no doubt. You talked about how resilient the people are on this call. I agree with that, and I would say even more than that this state is a resilient state, and I would not at all be surprised at the end of this process to learn that Colorado has led all 50 states in the reemergence of our economy and putting this pandemic behind us. So with that, John, I'll turn it back to you and look forward to answering your questions or taking your comments.
Wonderful, Senator. So I would just say this, that you have great partners in the Northwest Chamber Alliance, and the businesses that we represent, our individual chambers, are here to partner with you. I know that the individual leaders of those chamber organizations each have some questions for you. So I'm going to walk through in order, the alphabetical order, those individuals. And first, I'm going to call upon Sam Taylor, who is the president and CEO of the Broomfield Chamber. Sam.
Hi, John. Thank you very much. Senator Bennet, can you hear me fine?
I hear you fine, Sam.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us on this. As John mentioned, we do know you are a very good listener. It's a great trait in a senator, and I'm glad you have it. My first question goes back a little bit farther. Even before the pandemic, many of our small businesses worried about being able to provide health insurance for employees. They just can't compete with some of the larger organizations because of the size of their insurance pool. Now that many of them are laying off their staff, their employees can't afford to pay for the insurance once they've been laid off, and the employers don't have any revenue coming in. So the problem's even more acute. Is there any sense that some type of discussion in Washington or some type of public option of at least COVID treatment, if not healthcare in general, might be percolating?
Sam, as you probably know, I've long been an advocate for a public option. I think it's the fastest way for us to get to universal health insurance in this country without raising a single dollar of taxes on anybody. And my hope is that we'll have a lot of things that come out of this pandemic, which I wouldn't wish on anybody. Among other things, a reconsideration of the fact of the reasons why we're the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't cover everybody and doesn't see our own self-interest in covering everybody, our economic interest, to say nothing of the moral interest. I suspect that we're going to, for the short term, be dealing with the existing system. That means ensuring that people can keep their current health insurance when possible, make sure that they're accessing tax credits to support health insurance on the exchange. Same is true for Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP. But I could not agree with you more. And if there is an opportunity to introduce a conversation, even for a temporary public option, I'd be interested in doing that.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
I'm going to call on next from the great Lafayette Chamber, Vicki Trumbo, the Executive Director. Vicki?
Yes, you heard that right, John?
I did. I'm with you, and I think the senator is too.
Okay,
Hi,
so
Vicki.
my question, Senator Bennett, talks a little bit more to the future when, if and when businesses are able to weather this storm and they can open back up. What are your thoughts on a national return to work plan? I know the U.S. Chamber is starting to advocate for that, but I want to know your thoughts on that down the road.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicki. It's on the mind of so many people. And let me just say, look, for purposes of this conversation and for every conversation, I don't care whether anybody voted for the president or didn't vote for the president, but let me just give you just a little bit of perspective here. We are one nation under God for a reason, and that reason are things like this pandemic. And when you look at what's happened because the national government has refused to lead, we have created a situation where literally every single hospital in this country is competing with every single hospital in this country, every other hospital for supplies. Even our VA hospital in Denver is having to buy their own supplies on the open market. There's no plan for the national VA system. And every state, Jared Polis is having to compete with every other governor for supplies. This is creating a very predictable outcome, which is prices are going way up and the scarcity is getting even worse. And yesterday I heard talking about how he was, that the governors were the ones that had to lead the way on testing. That's consistent with his view on supplies. It is no less preposterous than what we've been dealing with. And this issue about reopening depends not just on, the economy, but also knowing that we have the healthcare infrastructure in place to reopen, that we can test people, that we have a robust system so that we're testing people all over the country. So we've got ways of being able to head off hotspots for the disease. If we do not have that kind of infrastructure, what we're going to end up doing inevitably is opening the economy and then closing the economy as soon as there's another recurrence of COVID. We are going to have to manage this disease with an open economy. I don't believe we're going to stay closed until, for example, we have a vaccine. A vaccine is probably 18 months away. But we do need the tools to reopen. And what I worry about a little bit when I'm watching the president do his thing in his press conference is what he's sort of setting it up to do is blame the governors if, in fact, the economy doesn't open. I would much rather work with others, including the chamber and including people like Scott Gottlieb, who was Donald Trump's FDA director, who's a guy that I have a very, very high regard for, who's put out a plan for how to reopen the government. I think we can forge a consensus on this if we don't play politics and create a situation where we're opening the economy with the tools we need to manage the pandemic in a way, knowing that the economy probably won't be completely open until we've got a vaccine and until we've got ubiquitous testing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. Up next, from the Latino Chamber of Boulder County, Chair of the Board of Directors, Pete Salas.
Just wanted to thank you for meeting with us today. A number of us, as has already been indicated, have been meeting to talk about this issue. The Latino Chamber of Commerce, as our name indicates, is primarily concerned with those Latino businesses and employees in those businesses and the impact that COVID-19 has had with regard to businesses and employees. I guess one of the overriding concerns that we have, we're able to at least talk to some of our businesses and survey some of our businesses. But as you know, many of our businesses in Boulder County not just Latino businesses, but other businesses as well, employ immigrant workforces, many of whom in many cases are undocumented. And our concern is that many of the undocumented employees, as well as several, we also know several business owners who are undocumented. Our concern is that they're not going to receive any of the benefits that are going out. And just curious about what your office has been doing in that regard, help that you might be providing to employees and employers who are in that situation, and anything that you can help us with in terms of working with that particular population that we serve, both as businesses and as employers.
So, Pete, thank you. I really appreciate it. So let me say a couple things. One, if anybody has any folks that have any immigration issues at all, as always, please contact my Denver office at 303-455-7600. Before this COVID crisis hit us, I could have put every single person on my staff on immigration cases and veterans cases, and they'd be busy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We take a lot of pride in the work that we do on immigration cases and matching people up with means of support. So we'd love to be your first call on those issues. Second, we have been doing whatever we can to get support for our state and local governments so that they can get people, they can reach people who are left out of the broader federal programs. I regret the fact that, the DREAM Act has been displaced by this administration. I regret the fact that we didn't pass the immigration bill that I helped write in 2013 as part of the Gang of Eight that passed the Senate but never passed the House. And in the meantime, I think what we can do that's most useful is get those resources, state and local governments, and have those resources in as flexible way as possible serve the human resources, human services departments of those localities. Obviously, I do. If I were left to do it myself, I'd do it a different way. But we can't get it through the Senate. The other thing I'd point out for people that are not undocumented is that there are important payments in this bill for people that are working and who, some of whom are middle class, some of whom are living in poverty. The $1,200 payment, the $500 payment. I was on the phone with the IRS commissioner last week to make sure that is coming quickly rather than slowly, and that we're being expansive in the way that we're thinking about how to get it to people. He and I also discussed this as an issue not of undocumented people, but the issue of the refugee community in our country and how we can get these resources to them. So I hope you'll call us if you've got specific immigration issues, and in the meantime, know that we're trying to get as much relief to the state and local governments, because I think that's where the resources are really going to come in the political era in which we're living.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Pete. So, hailing from the northeast corner of the Northwest region and representing the Longmont Area Chamber of Commerce, it's CEO Scott Cook.
All right. Thank you, John, and thank you, Senator Bennet, for being with us here. Thank you. On behalf of all of our Longmont businesses and all of our communities, really, we appreciate your time in this busy time. We learned recently that the Federal Reserve announced new lending for mid-size Main Street businesses, or those businesses with more than 500 employees and revenue that excludes them from PPP and other loans. And while these businesses are typically larger than most in our memberships, they still represent an important part of our membership and our local economy. And I was wondering if you could speak to anything else that's available to this size, to these sizes of businesses. It's my understanding that these are only loans, that there's no forgiveness as we find in the PPP program, and that the loans aren't available yet, but they soon will be.
First of all, you're right. This isn't the kind of generous forgiveness in the PPP program. There is an employee retention credit for up to $5,000 per employee. I've worried that the total amount that's been set out here is going to be insufficient, nowhere near enough to deal with the economic tailspin that we're facing. And as you point out, these are important employers as well. I mean, I understand why people think differently about small business and larger business. But the reality from the employee's perspective is that they're employees and they're human beings that we want to try to keep attached to their employer as long as possible. So we do as little damage to that relationship. And the theory is, when we come out of this, that we will historically been more intact. So I don't think we've gotten the guidance from Treasury yet on this, but let me ask Charlie Anderson, if you're on the phone, whether you know whether they've put it out and what they've said and what else Scott might be able to expect going forward. But this is not for the small businesses. This is for 500 plus employee businesses.
Right. Yeah. So can folks hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. So yeah, Scott's exactly right. It's a loan program. The Federal Reserve put out sort of the parameters. I don't know. I believe it was last week. It feels like a month ago. I don't believe they've started to make loans yet. And I think, as Michael pointed out, there is this employee retention credit of up to $5,000 per employee if you've lost a significant amount of revenue. I think folks understand that there's a bit of a gap here. You have sort of businesses below 500 employees. You have businesses that are quite large and might have access to other means of financing and other, also businesses that are open versus the sort of middle market, 500 to, depends on 2,500 to 5,000 employees kind of area where you're kind of stuck in the middle. And I think there's a lot of people thinking about how can the support be more expansive, sort of more in line with kind of PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program that's available to smaller businesses. I think, part of the constraints here were sort of imposed from the outside on kind of saying no more than $350 billion. And so people drew lines that I think were somewhat unhelpful. And so I know there's a lot of people hearing from businesses like yours and others that are 500 to, 5,000 employees. So not super big, but big enough to really, really matter to local communities and trying to figure out a solution here.
I would just add to that the $350 billion cap, which was what Treasury insisted on in in the bill for small business meant that the coverage ratios were a lot lower than they should have been, and that's one of the things that we're hoping to make progress on in the next version of the bill. 2.5 times just is not enough for a lot of folks, and now that Mitch McConnell is back on the floor saying we need more money, which was predictable, that may give us the opportunity to be able to negotiate a more generous package, which would be good.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Hailing from the beautiful Louisville area, Shelley Angel, Executive Director of the Louisville Chamber of Commerce.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Am I on? Okay. Senator Bennet, thank you so much for meeting with us. Appreciate this so much. Mine isn't necessarily a business question. It kind of deals with all people, but because of the isolation and the social distancing, which is very unnatural for all of us, how will the mental health issues that this is causing be addressed?
So thank you. This is an issue I've heard about across the state. I'd say two things. One, this is the reason why we need to make sure that the money that goes to state and local governments is as unrestricted as possible. I've mentioned that a couple of times. Let me hone in on that for just one brief second. There were people in the Congress that insisted that we write that the money be spent only on COVID-related expenses by states and local governments, not on revenue replacement. If you talk to any county commissioner or city council person in this state, no matter whether in a red part of the state or a blue part of the state, what they'll tell you is everything is COVID-related, including their desire to continue to support people through mental health agencies during this really, really difficult time. So I think that flexibility is going to be a primary way to do it. There's also, when I get on the phone with the other my Senate colleagues, sometimes it's Republicans and Democrats. Today it just happened to be with, the Democratic caucus. There were a number of people that raised the issue of trying to do more for mental health issues in this next bill. I've raised the issue in my caucus of concerns about domestic abuse, which is an issue that I'm hearing about in our state. So we'll put it on the list. It's an important part of what we need to do going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and last but not least for sure, TJ Sullivan, Executive Director of the Superior Chamber of Commerce. TJ.
Good afternoon, Senator.
Hi,
every
TJ.
time there's how are you, sir? Good to hear. Good to talk to you.
I'm great.
Every time there is a terrible tragedy, nursing homes are hit terribly hard. In Katrina, for example, at least 140 patients died in 13 Louisiana nursing homes. Yesterday, USA Today reported that over 2,300 long-term care facilities in 37 states have COVID cases with more than 3,000 dead. There is no tracking at the federal level by the CDC nor the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and the 2019 HHS Emergency Preparedness Guidelines seem like nothing more than basically that, guidelines. My question is, as we learn lessons from yet another national crisis, can the federal government do anything to help those in the elder care business to reduce the vulnerability of this population?
I cannot state it any better than you did. I was on the phone last night with about 50 Coloradans, and one raised a set of circumstances of a friend of theirs who's in a elder care facility where 2 or 3 people have tested positive for COVID, and yet there's no capacity to test anybody else who's in the nursing home for COVID. We've seen reports this morning from Louisiana, or Virginia maybe it was, where 40% of the people in in a single nursing home have lost their life. There are many other countries in the world that maybe I shouldn't overstate it. There are a number of other countries in the world where people have access to tests and access to protocols and access to healthcare services that we don't have for everybody, including our elderly population. So what I would say about this is that as this crisis grinds on, we need to put in place protocols to protect the most vulnerable people. We do not have them today. That includes nursing homes. It includes overcrowded homeless shelters where, you wish for a moment where you had a test that, could register a result in just minutes, as some countries do. We're going to get there. I mean, but we're not there yet. And in the meantime, I'll hold on to your suggestion again for the next piece of legislation.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Well, that rounds it out for our chamber leaders. And I just want to, before handing it over to Andrea, who's going to ask questions from our listening audience, I just want to say how proud I am to work with all of these chamber members, chamber partners in coalition. And just know, Senator, that we are going to be here to work with our businesses collectively and representing the interests of the Northwest business community. So just a great group of individuals that I have the pleasure of partnering with.
You guys do a beautiful job of that, and the collaboration among the chambers just makes the work that much better and that much more useful to translate at the national level. So I'm sure that's the way it's going to happen with COVID, and I'm very grateful.
Great. Well, thank you, Senator. So let me hand it over to Andrea, who's going to ask questions from our listening audience.
Senator Bennet, this is Andrea Meneghel, Director of Public Affairs at the Boulder Chamber, and we've been getting in questions from our folks here that are listening in. We have over 60 people on the call today. And first is from Trustee Kevin Ryan. He said, thank you for the overview. In order to restart the economy, we'll need to prepare for isolated quarantines and a robust method of contact tracing. Where do you fall in the balance between public safety and privacy? And I got an indication here that James Thompson would actually like to answer that question. If you would prefer to start, and then James could add, or however you want to take it.
Well, I'm happy to take it on. I think that it's with the name Kevin, was that his trustee?
Yeah, Trustee Kevin Ryan.
The point, yeah, exactly right. We're going to have to have not just the testing in place that I was talking about earlier, but some methodology of trying to figure out where there are hotspots and where there are not. I doubt very much that our country is one that's going to accept turning over our cell phone data that demonstrate exactly where we were at every very moment and with whom we were gathered. I don't think that would be consistent with our Constitution or our Bill of Rights, and within the context of trying to protect the privacy rights that we hold so dear, we are going to have to figure out how to navigate this health challenge, and that's much easier said than done. I mean, I think we're seeing an example right now of the genius of our federalist system that our founders set up, which I do think was brilliant and a stroke of genius, basically being turned against itself at a moment when the leadership in Washington is supposed to take the national lead. They're not doing it, and we can see the vulnerabilities that we're confronting compared to countries around the world. That's also possible in the context of the response on the back end, and I would hope that instead of having this be a situation where every state is deciding this for themselves, we have a national conversation that balances competing interests. You know, they're all legitimate. There's nothing illegitimate about caring about the privacy interest. There's nothing illegitimate about caring about the healthcare interests. We just are going to have to strike the right balance for the United States of America, and I'm convinced we can do that. And I'm not sure James will have to add anything to that.
Actually, yeah, he just texted that good answer, and he doesn't have anything else to add.
Okay.
The next questions that we've received are from two individuals that are small landlords, and I'll batch these together so you could answer them both. One asks, as a small landlord, we paid our mortgage for April, but our tenants both lost their jobs and have no funds yet through unemployment insurance. And the next one is a similar one that basically says, Oh, it's the same one. Where do you go with this situation when you have no relief from the mortgage lender, when the folks have no relief? How do small property owners deal with situations like this from your perspective?
So I think this is one of the biggest challenges we face in the economic downturn that we're in right now. It's very, very problematic. Some of you may remember that before I was in politics, I was in business, and I worked for Phil Anschutz buying distressed companies, turning them around in bankruptcy. And I have a number of friends across the country with whom I did that work, and they sort of, a handful of them called me up separately and said, hey, you remember when we were doing all these bankruptcies, we had something called an automatic stay, which those of you that have done bankruptcies know about that. I mean, it's a stay during the bankruptcy proceedings that basically freezes everything, all the payments, until the bankruptcy state is out of bankruptcy, except for what's approved by the judge. And I've thought very hard about it and talked to people about a national stay of some kind that would say, to landlords and to leaseholders, hey, let's freeze it all. And if you owe a rent payment, you don't have to pay it. If you owe a payment upstream, if you're the landlord, you don't have to pay that until we get this all settled to buy a period of time. Could not figure out a way to make this work. And on a national level, that's sort of cratering people's expectations around contracts. We're still wrestling with the question. In the meantime, I really appreciate how many landlords and banks are working with people who owe them and are in difficult circumstances. I mean, the best thing, if it's possible, is for the banks to forbear and say, you know what, we're going to take these 2 months and tack them on at the end of whatever the lease payment period is. We are very lucky, parenthetically, that we're here at a moment when our banking sector is as strong as it is. During the last recession, obviously, that was not the circumstance. That is the circumstance here. So we know that some support is on the way for people who have lost their jobs through unemployment insurance, as the question suggested, and that the direct payment checks are being deposited in people's accounts as we speak. So hopefully that's going to help many people get current on their rent or mortgage, or at least not fall too far behind. And my hope is we'll forbear, because it's not going to do anybody any good if we have mass defaults across the economy. I also think that we need to provide additional relief to renters that goes to their landlords. The National Low-Income Housing Advocates have joined with the National Apartment Association and the National Multifamily Housing Coalition to push for a much broader rental assistance like that, on the order of $100 billion. We are in the middle of that conversation because we've been working with these guys on issues ranging from eviction to homelessness. And so we'll bring back the final place that we get to, but it is a place where I think we can make a difference in this next bill.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. The next question comes from Kay Boyer with the Zayo Group. The Zayo Group, based in Boulder, has been a big supporter of a lot of our initiatives, advocacy efforts at the Boulder Chamber, and we'd like to thank them for that. But we'd also like to ask this question on their behalf. That's really something that's been proposed by Zayo's CEO, Dan Caruso, about allowing healthcare facilities to have connectivity capabilities to support higher bandwidths and more modern fiber-based networks. Wants to know if you've considered these programs and some of the funding tranches that are coming, similar to a USAC funding of E-rate for schools, but aimed at the healthcare industry.
We have not, or at least I have not, and I'd be happy to take that up with you guys offline. I will track you down. I do know that in addition to healthcare facilities, we've got huge challenges in rural Colorado as we're trying to deliver our K-12 education to kids that don't have access to broadband. Didn't have it before this crisis started and don't have it now. So I'll follow up. Please tell Dan Caruso I said hello, and I'll ask Amy Friedman, who's on this call, to make sure that we get connected.
All right, we'll go ahead and follow up on that. The next question is coming from an anonymous attendee, but they do ask a question that said, with the massive amounts of dollars going to large companies and more possibly coming to fund infrastructure projects, we have a powerful tool to improve things on the climate crisis. Can we direct a portion of the stimulus funds to incentivize renewable energy improvements and energy efficiency improvements? This would provide compounding benefits to the economy and environment, as well as providing jobs going forward.
Well, of course, I would support anything along those lines. We know it's essential that what we've got to do right now is ensure that the tools that support clean energy companies, like the investment tax credit and the production tax credit, are able to work through this crisis. We've got a ton of energy in Colorado that of renewable energy that's coming online in the near term because of the leadership of our state. We've got to make sure that the sources of financing are not interrupted. This might mean providing cash in lieu of a tax credit, like was the case in the wake of the financial crisis. So I have heard at a different call, Senator Gardner support a request similar to that one, and I hope you'll raise that tomorrow. I'm not doing that to play gotcha. I just heard him say it, and having bipartisan support would help us going forward. Obviously, I'll look for anything we can do in terms of these investments to move us in a direction that addresses climate change. Hard to believe sometimes when Mitch McConnell's in charge of the place, but you never know. I was part of the deal that created a trade for the export of crude oil to extend those production tax credits that I was talking about earlier. And those production tax credits really are almost the only thing that still survived from the Obama administration on when it comes to clean energy. I also would say that it just consistent with the question that we've got to think about things like grid modernization and other investments that made sense before we had a crisis, but as we come to the back end are going to make a lot of sense as we think about investments in our infrastructure.
Thank you, Senator Bennet. Along those lines, from energy infrastructure to transportation infrastructure, I have a question that I'd like to pose on behalf of the Northwest Chamber Alliance and also our partners at Boulder Transportation Connections, our local transportation management organization. And that is that we were recently in Washington, D.C., meeting with your staff in your office, actually, while you were pulled into the COVID briefing when everything just went totally bananas. And we had a great conversation with your staff a few weeks ago here in one of the last meetings people were holding in person about the dollars we were seeking to improve our transportation corridors, State Highway 119, State Highway 7. On 119, we're submitting for a build grant. And so we're wondering when the federal stimulus dollars are coming for transportation infrastructure as part of the recovery for COVID to create jobs, to get things going. Will they be part of the FAST Act? Will they be separate? And then our partners from Boulder Transportation Connections want to know specifically if we're going to be seeing more going to transit improvements, being that ridership's taken a huge hit, but the transit agencies and the revenue challenges are going to have to be in play here to keep our workforce moving and part of the mobility solution.
Yeah, such a good question. Well, there were some dollars in the last COVID bill for transit and for transit agencies because realizing that the revenue is going to go to zero. And I'm going to ask my office actually to make a note for us to take a look at where that money is yet been deployed, because nobody's asked me that question since we've been doing this. So we'll follow up on that and we'll get you an answer. On the broader transportation question, I don't know whether infrastructure is going to be included in this next COVID package. It looked more likely earlier on than it does now. I think people are coming to coming to grips with what the size of this is going to look like. And I'm just not sure we're going to be able to do infrastructure as part of it. Maybe we will, and I certainly would be an advocate for it because our investment in infrastructure is long overdue, which I think brings me to the broader point here, which is we were very unprepared for this crisis. And I think we were unprepared in part because we have so dramatically underinvested in this country over the last 20 years, and some might say even the last 50 years. And when you look at what we have been spending our resources on, since 2001, we've borrowed $5 trillion from the Chinese to give almost only the wealthiest people in America tax cuts. I mean, so to put that in a clearer or more stark example, it would be as if the mayor of Longmont or Boulder, any of these communities, went to the voters and said, I'm going to take out more debt than we've ever taken out before. And you'd say to them, well, that worries me. What are you going to spend that money on? And if their answer was, well, I'm first of all borrowing it from the Chinese because we actually can't pay for it, but I'm not going to use it for infrastructure. I'm not going to use it for broadband. I'm not going to use it for health care. I'm not going to use it for education. I'm not going to use it for mental health. I'm not going to use it for economic development. What are you using it for? I'm going to take the money and give it to the two wealthiest neighborhoods in our community. You would say, what are you smoking? That has been the tax policy since 2001 of the people that have cut taxes, not paid for it, and at the same time not invested in our infrastructure. At the same time that's been happening for the last 20 years, we borrowed another $5.6 trillion from the Chinese to pay for two wars in the Middle East that did not remotely achieve the results that we have told the American people over 20 years that we were going to achieve. So my fervent hope is that I wish it hadn't taken this crisis to sharpen our minds, but my hope is that when we get on the back end of this, we're going to start saying to ourselves, too much money spent in a way that didn't generate economic growth for the American people, wasn't an investment in our physical capital, wasn't an investment in our human capital. And now that we're in the 2020s, we're going to start thinking about how we set this country up to lead again in the 21st century, how we pay for the infrastructure we need, invest in the education system that we need, the higher education system that we need. All of this stuff has been bootstrapped for too long, and I think we're showing, we're paying a price for that today. So that's not obviously for today's agenda, but it is something I think for us to think about as we move forward.
Senator Bennet, we have one more question that could be quick answer, and then we're going to let you wrap it up with any closing comments. And I just want to add, for those of you that have submitted questions that we have not been able to get through within this time limit, we will go ahead and submit those to Senator Bennett's office, to our partner, James Thompson, who's here locally, and we'll work to get every one of these questions and comments answered and addressed. And we'll send those out to all of those that are on this call today. So we thank everyone for being on this.
Good.
As a last question, Senator Bennet, there's folks from our convention and visitors bureaus and from each one of these chambers that we're really working hard to support our businesses which have been hit hard. During this next round of funding, is there a fix to include the 501c6s and those organizations that are trying to support all of our businesses?
We are working hard on that, and every single member of the Senate, I think, has heard from their chambers in particular that this was an oversight in the bill, and so that we will address that. I was glad that we addressed the 501c3s, but it was not a complete picture. So thanks for reminding me again, and I feel quite confident we'll take care of that in the next bill.
Thank you, Senator Bennet. And we turn it over to you for closing remarks, and then to John to wrap it up.
I just want to thank all of you. You're all in positions of leadership, and nobody picks a time like this to lead. But it's a moment when you've got the opportunity to rise to the occasion. I know everybody will. Just the way that we've seen local leaders rise in the face of fires and in floods, the different series, that we're all in this together at the same time. And I think if we treat it that way, if we understand that our politics has been much too divided, that we have the opportunity now to come together with a set of American priorities and Colorado priorities that set us up for the future in a way that that makes our kids and our grandkids' future brighter, we will have accomplished something. And on the way to that, I think we should be guided by the science and guided by the facts, make sure that we're not hiding under our beds, scared of something that we don't need to hide under our beds to deal with. We just have to come together and behave in a rational way so that we can get the pandemic behind us, our economy growing ahead of us, and off to the races again. No question is too big or too small. No criticism is too big or too small. Please reach out to my either to James or the Denver office. And this is a moment where constituent service, I think, means more than really at any other time. And so we are anxious to work for you through this process. So, John, thank you for having me, and I look forward to seeing everybody someday soon in person.
Senator, we just know how incredibly busy you are, and we at the same time just know that we are grateful for your thoughtful character of leadership during this very tumultuous period. I will say this, that you know our businesses are struggling.
Yep.
We are here as partners, the Northwest Chamber Alliance, all the chambers and the businesses that we represent. We're working with you in unity and collaboratively, and just know that you can call upon us to answer questions, to get support for your efforts. So absolutely thank you for your time, and thank you for your voice on behalf of our businesses at the federal level.
Thank you. Stay well, everybody. Talk to you.
So just a couple of closing items for everybody on the call. Just a reminder that tomorrow we will have another town hall with Senator Cory Gardner, hosted and moderated expertly by my colleague Scott Cook from the Longmont Chamber. And that is tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Just follow the link on your invitation, and you can register that way. And again, this is an exclusive benefit for the top leaders of the chamber organizations that are represented in the Northwest Chamber Alliance. So just to be very clear, we bring this type of activity to you, our top members, because we so value and appreciate your support of our work. I also want you to know that there are a number of great resources on the websites for each of the chambers that are represented here today. So please check that out. That's information that helps you to understand how to operate your business, get access to financial resources. It's also a way for you to connect with us to let us know what your other needs are that we can support you with. And then I'll just close by first thanking our sponsors for making this kind of an event possible. And then also to our attendees. As they say, we're in this together. That means all of the businesses and the members of our organizations that we're working together to get through this. We will get through it, and we'll be, as Senator Bennet suggested, we'll be the leaders in our recovery effort. So thank you all for your attendance. Take care.